All right, take two, and welcome to Mr. K is Wrong, a podcast where I debunk the Facebook memes posted by somebody that I named Mr. K to hide his identity. And he posts a bunch of right wing garbage on his Facebook wall, and I go through that and I say, oh, this is what's wrong with that post. And some of his posts have been pretty extreme, some of them relatively moderate, but today, it's actually a little bit on the extreme side because he's defending Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. So he posted a meme from Conservatives Today on Facebook. It has an image of Joe McCarthy and it says, as if it's quoting him. It's not a real quote, but I mean, that's like the first rat to be smelled, is that the quote being attributed to him is obviously not real. But anyway, it says 70 years ago, I told you that communists were taking over our schools, Hollywood, MSM, and the Democratic Party. You laughed at me and turned me into a boogeyman. How is that working out for you? Joseph McCarthy. Again, as if that was a real quote from the guy. So, how is that working out for me? Well, it's actually working out pretty well because it's a good thing to not have a bunch of McCarthyist witch hunts, Joe McCarthy style witch hunts, or moral panics, or whatever you want to call them, Red Scare type garbage, because you know what? You don't need that even. If somebody is actually committing a crime, it doesn't matter whether or not they're a communist or whatever you want to call them politically. If they're committing a crime, then go after them for that specific crime. All right? So no, Joseph McCarthy wasn't right. The meme relies on hindsight, vagueness, and a very loose definition of communist. I'll get into that in a little bit here. So once you look at the facts, the meme just falls apart. And for starters, point number one, McCarthy wasn't right but early. He was actually mostly wrong about just about everything that he said. Joseph McCarthy claimed he had lists of communists embedded throughout government and public life. He never produced credible evidence to support those claims. Senate investigations, journalists, and even members of his own party eventually concluded that he exaggerated, fabricated, or recklessly repeated accusations. That's why he was censured by the Senate in 1954, not silenced, not vindicated, formally condemned. And again, if there were any actual crimes committed by people, well, then you could go after them without these public show trials, right? You can just go, go after them for whatever crimes they actually committed. Point number two, disagreeing with conservatives doesn't equal communism. I know, what a shock. What a shocker. And they keep on shifting the goalposts. Like, by this point, a person even saying that due process is something that belongs in our system. Well, some right wingers out there, they're claiming that is akin to being a communist. And they'll be like, "Oh, immigrants aren't entitled to due process." Well, actually they are. It's right there in the US Constitution. You got to, I guess, actually read that document that you claim to love so well if you're a right winger. But they don't like to read, I guess. So I guess somebody like me will have to just read that out to them, at some point, if I'm ever in a debate with such a person. But the meme depends on redefining communist to mean left leaning or culturally liberal. Actual communism, or more specifically, authoritarian communism, involves abolishing private property, state control of the economy, and one party rule. Now, a lot of dum dums out there don't realize that there's also non authoritarian communism, or free communism, anarcho communism, whatever you want to call it. In fact, they'll dismiss any mention of that, as if that was never a historical tendency in the world of politics. But if you want to be actually thorough and understand how history happened and left wing movements have actually functioned, you would quickly realize, oh, actually, there were different schools of communist thought. There were even, people who were somewhere in the middle, somewhere between being a radical communist and um, actually having more authoritarian tendencies. And the interesting thing is the the McCarthyite types, they will latch on to those more moderate communists as an example of um, the corruption of culture or the degradation of culture. They'll say, look, even these moderate people have something in common with these more radical people, and it's evidence that the communists are infiltrating our culture and society. And of course, keep in mind, in the segregation days, one of the common claims was that if you were in favor of desegregation and you liked integration, well, that was a communist plot. So this was very easily intertwined with the KKK style mentality and white supremacy as well. So all of these different far right extremist ideologies really quite often latch onto the anti communist cause as a rallying cry, a way to get people to be paranoid. And of course, fascism is just as bad as authoritarian communism, but the right wingers don't see it that way, apparently. And U.S. they'll claim that U.S. schools, Hollywood, mainstream media, or the Democratic Party advocate communism, but they don't. The Democratic Party supports capitalism, private enterprise, and constitutional government. Well, I mean, to an extent, anyway. So do public schools and major media outlets. Again, to an extent. I mean, in reality, you know, our system is not purely capitalistic. Uh, I could go into how private property is largely, not actually a free market thing because it is protected by the government. It is, the whole system of capitalism is actually a government system because it's propped up by laws and the legal system and lawsuits and all sorts of threats. And a lot of these claims about a free market are very easy to debunk. So I could get further into that, but I might as well not. The point is, the public schools and major media outlets are actually more corporate in their structure. If everything left of conservative is labeled communist, then the word stops meaning anything. It's a silly thing to say, oh, there's a communist under every rock or whatever. Point number three: McCarthy targeted people for beliefs, associations, and rumors, not their actions. Teachers, writers, and actors lost jobs not because they were overthrowing the government, but because they had attended meetings, signed petitions, or they refused to testify about others. They were accused, but in most cases, they were not communists at all. Careers were destroyed based on suspicion alone. That's the core reason McCarthy became a historical villain, not because he made powerful enemies, but because he ruined people's lives based on things they happened to believe and false accusations that they were more radical than they were in a lot of cases. And of course, I mean, there's an element of this that's just actually chicken shit because if you even have somebody, or even if you have somebody who is an authoritarian communist or non-authoritarian communist. Well, you should be able to debate their ideas and debunk them and prove them wrong, rather than try to sick the government at them. And that's not how you debunk an argument. You don't just go after the government. Yeah, well, or I mean, you don't just go after them with the government, I should say. The that doesn't disprove the ideas and all that kind of stuff. So, the idea was to just make certain wide portions of the public into enemies, which is actually what Donald Trump is trying to do right now as well. Point number 4, institutions changing over time does not prove infiltration, and I suggested that earlier. Culture evolves, universities became more secular, and society in general became more secular. And here's a dark little secret that hopefully one day right wingers will finally understand: the United States actually has a secular government by design. In fact, people don't talk about this often enough, but Thomas Jefferson was a key figure in disestablishing the Anglican Church, or the Church of England in Virginia, viewing it as crucial for religious freedom, primarily through his authorship of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1786, which ended state support and created a wall between church and state, paving the way for the First Amendment. So, all these right wingers, they talk about the First Amendment like they love it so much, but really, that's one of the things the First Amendment does, is it does take away the ability for the government to merge with the churches. And Jefferson believed religious institutions shouldn't be state supported, advocating for freedom of conscience and ending forced taxation for churches, though he himself attended Anglican services and remained a theist. And the fact is that the story is always a little bit more complicated when it comes to these narratives of being anti-secular among the left, because it wasn't just something that leftists did. You could actually oppose theocratic government and be a secular person while being a religious person, and also even conservative leaning to some extent. And of course, the fact is that Hollywood became more socially liberal, not because of communism, but because media norms shifted, societal norms shifted, the different cultures that actually exist out there. People started to learn more about them over time. Obviously, immigration. I know those scary, scary immigrants, but they also have influenced and moderated how we view the different types of people out there. And that happened gradually in public through normal social and political processes. There is no evidence of a secret communist takeover directing these changes from the shadows, which is what McCarthy claimed, and what this meme definitely is also trying to claim. So, of course, the meme uses outcome bias and cherry picking. It tries to claim that communists caused all these bad things. But of course, at the same time, the meme doesn't really specify a whole lot about what is so bad about in the first place. It just says communists were taking over schools, Hollywood, and the Democratic Party. Okay, and what have they done? What have they done that's so bad? The meme doesn't even specify. It's just empty fear mongering. There isn't even a very specific critique, and of course that's part of how these people operate in the first place. If you're vague, you don't have to prove or disprove a whole lot. Now, do you? So the bottom line here is that McCarthy wasn't a misunderstood truth teller. He was a reckless demagogue who damaged lives and institutions by substituting accusation for proof. Modern political disagreements and cultural liberalism do not retroactively validate his claims. In fact, the meme works as emotional grievance and not as history. So, yeah. All right. Have a good one.